Hey now, everybody. Welcome back to brand new Take Aim podcast. This episode of Take Aim was brought to you by Huntstand. If you have not had the chance to download and use the Huntstand app, it's one of the most complete mapping featured apps available today. Use the code TakeAim10 at checkout to upgrade to the pro version. But super excited to get Bill Winke on the show today. Many of us know, myself included, Bill from the years of Midwest Whitetail. Bill has since moved on, but excited that we got to sit down and chat and really dive into how Bill kind of is hunting his new place in northeast Iowa. Bill used to be in south central, let's call it, Iowa, and just the change, the difference in his approach to hunting that piece of property. And there's a lot of good stuff in this episode from, Bill was previously a large landowner, and now he's leasing a farm, and just all the changes that goes into that about being respectful, what you can do, what you can't do, and the difference in just generally this property he hunts, the elevation is so much different than what he did in southern Iowa. So just all kinds of good stuff, just the right approach and how to do things the right way. So super excited to have Bill on the show. And like Bill says in this episode, you can find more of Bill on Bill Winke's website and Bill Winke's YouTube channel. So make sure to check those out as well. But it's a great episode. As always, deer season never ends. We'll see you guys again next week. All right, guys, we are live, brand new Take Aim podcast, and excited to get back and a new show out, and excited to talk with this guy. A lot of people know him, have seen him for years, followed him forever, but excited to have Bill Winke on the podcast today. And how you doing, Bill?
Good, Brandon. How are you?
Good, man. Appreciate you being here today, and excited to talk some deer hunting with you.
Yeah, I mean, what else would we rather do?
I know, exactly. It's kind of that time. I know you were just fishing, and it's sometime right in the summer. I feel like for a lot of us, that switch kind of flips again, and for me, it's always right around July 4th. I kind of get that urge again. Some of the deer and the racks are kind of filling out, and it's velvet time, and it's just a really good time to kind of get your head back in the game.
Yeah, and for me, I think it really hits in August when we start getting those cooler nights. It's harder for me to identify with the fall hunting season when it's 75, 80 degrees at night and 95 during the day. So we start hitting those cooler times. Oh boy, that's when, it starts to feel like the season's right around the corner.
Yeah, for sure. So I know, Bill, that you have covered some of this content, previously about you departing Midwest Whitetail and all that, and I don't want to waste much time on it because I'm sure you don't. You feel like it's already out there. But since you've already departed and business-wise and all that, did you feel like last year was kind of were you super excited about deer season, being that, like, that's a big part of your life was kind of over? And I've sold a business recently, like within the last 2 years, and I probably feel a little bit for you in that regard, that it kind of drains you a little bit. So were you kind of like, man, I just want to go sit in a tree? And do you feel a little bit different leading up to this deer season as well?
I think the biggest difference is, I didn't feel like I had to have a reason for everything I did. I could just go do something because I wanted to, not because it made sense. So I picked some stand locations that really didn't make sense, but they were really pretty, and it was just a spot that I wanted to sit. And, in the Midwest Whitetail days, everything we did, we kind of had to fit it into the story or the grand scheme, of why we were there, so we could continue to, keep the story going of, a specific deer or a strategy that we were working through. It was just kind of refreshing to not have an agenda for any given day's hunt. I was still trying to kill a buck, but
right.
The motivation of telling that story was gone. So it was more just relaxing, I guess. You're not constantly trying to connect the dots. You can just go hunt and just sit there and just stare off into space if you want to.
Right.
So that part of it, I think, was refreshing for me. Not having to have a reason for everything that I did and just do it because I wanted to. There's some places, and that, there's just some places you just want to sit.
Yeah, there's some that are just, like you said, scenic, and if you see a deer or by chance get a shot, that's a bonus, but sometimes you go just to be there, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I think that was the most refreshing part. Not having the camera there makes it a lot more relaxing, of course. You don't have to be on your game all the time, and you only have to put up one stand, which, believe it or not, people think, oh, that's not that much harder. It's not. It really is a lot harder because, to find a tree where you can get two stands into.
Stands, yeah.
Yeah, it's way harder than finding a tree that you can get one stand into. So that was kind of fun too, is just knowing that the whole woods was opened up to me all of a sudden, rather than saying there's only 20% of the trees in here or 10% that I can get two stands in.
Yeah.
That was fun, and then like I said, just more relaxing. So
yeah, for sure. I'm sure that you didn't have that sense of urgency all the time, which is probably just kind of weight off the shoulders a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I hunted better. I really did. I mean, to really be successful at deer hunting, sometimes you got to go beyond that point of comfort, and convenience. And so much of what we did, there was two people there and all the gear that we had to carry, and then we also had to do the daily video blogs and so forth. So we always had to be within range of something, some kind of technology where we could edit the videos and get them uploaded. And we couldn't just sleep in the truck, and we couldn't just, during the middle of the day, just climb down and sit on a rock overlooking a beautiful valley. We had to work. We had to get stuff done. We had to get videos out, and I think just not having that secondary motive allowed me to zero in on the deer better. I didn't have to worry about whether the guy with me was going to balk at sleeping in the truck or, sleeping at the base of the tree, or whatever.
Right.
There's a lot of ways you can be more successful deer hunting by going super hardcore, but it's tough to expect somebody else to go along with that too. So I felt like the hunting was way more hardcore than what it had been with a cameraman with me.
Right. Yeah, it probably gives you a lot more singular vision, so to speak, where you can, like you said, that your daily goal now for Bill is to go hunt, which is way different than you've lived for the past 15 years.
Yeah. When the daily goal is to produce video, that's a different goal. So anyway, I mean, I don't want to bore people with this conversation talking about that, but that's a very real part of what people experience when they're filming their hunts. And I think the viewers don't realize that, it is fun. Granted, it's a great way to make a living if you can make a living doing it, way better than a real job. But it's not like you're just going hunting.
Right, it's work.
It's the business is the video part. So that's the part you have to take serious. The hunting becomes secondary to the video part. Yeah,
for sure. Well, one thing that, the topic today, Bill, I wanted to share is kind of just your difference of what you hunted in southern Iowa, and now you're what are you, about 4 or 5 hours away, Bill, from your previous home in Iowa?
Yeah, so we're about halfway between. So it was about 4 hours from where we lived before up to my folks, and now we're about in the middle. So it's about 2 hours either way.
Okay. So one thing I wanted to talk about was just kind of like the difference between the two and just how your approach has changed and all that. So we can kind of just dive into that a little bit. But I wanted to start with, now that you're back, I know that previously this is where you kind of cut your teeth into deer hunting and bow hunting. So what has changed now versus what it was when Bill started hunting in northeast Iowa 30, 40 years ago?
Gosh, it's so much, the amount of information and the knowledge of how to kill the deer is so much more available. When I was a kid, we didn't know anything. I mean, literally, there was Bowhunter magazine, and that was it. And you could read every single page in that magazine and still not know what to do. So the information is so much more useful. And you can almost, figure out how to kill a big deer by watching enough videos and reading enough stuff online. Whereas when I was a kid, the only way you did it was just spend days and days and years, and
Right.
So I wasn't very successful when I was a kid. Whereas now going into it, it's like, wow, I didn't realize how much easier this was second time around than the first time around. As a kid hunting up there, it was a battle trying to figure out how to kill one. And now it's sort of like, I know what you need to do. But I think even more than that is the land use and land ownership. That's completely changed.
Sure.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I am fourth generation on both sides of my family in that county. So my mom was on one side of town and my dad was on the other side of town. So, I'm related to just about, 50% of the people in that county. And growing up, at one point I had knocked on 64 doors and I only had one person tell me no. So I had like 63 of 64 or something like that.
That's crazy.
I had more than 60 different properties that I had permission to hunt. And now if I knocked on doors, I'd probably get, 5 out of 60. I get better than that. I'm still related to all those people. There'd be some family member there somewhere that would say, "Oh, Bill, yeah, go ahead." But it wouldn't be nearly as good. But I could get permission, no doubt. But anyway, that's really changed a lot. The availability of being able to go wherever I want to go. But the other thing that's changed too is there's more deer there now, and there's more deer management. There's more bigger deer that have cropped up in that area, and that's typical of just about any place I think that's got private land now in the Midwest. Is the number of mature bucks has grown as people have gotten more selective.
Yep. Now, locally, Bill, I'm sure you know some of the people, but are some of the people up there kind of on board with what we would call deer management?
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe less than in southern Iowa. There's still a really strong tradition in northeast part of the state of just, shooting deer. Right. Like I sat out there, or didn't sit out there, I hunted with a local group the opening day of the shotgun season, and we heard a lot more shots around than what I ever heard around my farm down in southern Iowa on the opening day of the shotgun season. So there's just more general hunting and more groups that are, more of the brown it's down kind of mentality, I would say in general. A longer tradition, stronger tradition of the larger groups and doing the deer drives.
Okay.
Yeah, in southern Iowa, there was more of a tradition of people hunting the muzzleloader seasons and, selectively killing the biggest deer. It was people got really, really good at killing big deer during the late season with muzzleloaders in southern Iowa. Oh my gosh! It was like murder. And you don't see that most areas of the Midwest, but certainly not an area where I grew up. That hasn't really caught on yet. But that's the way to kill a big deer. If you just want to kill a big deer and you don't really, you're not super concerned about exactly how you do it. If you hunt a farm that hasn't been hunted or a whole neighborhood that hasn't been hunted very much during the gun seasons, and then you wait until it gets really cold and you show up, one evening with your muzzleloader sitting on a corn food plot, you're going to shoot the best deer in that area. That's just a given. And the guys, like I said, they got really good at that in southern Iowa near where I live, but that's not the case as much up in the part where I grew up.
Yeah, they've definitely made a name for themselves in southern Iowa for that muzzleloader season, and you have just seen there's just proofs in the pudding. It's all over YouTube, and every show that's been out on Outdoor Channel for the past several years, a lot of the biggest bucks on all these shows have been killed, like Bill said, during that late muzzleloader season, and it's all over food, and it's just like Bill said, it's like murder. You can do it.
Yeah, it's really not. There's still a strategy involved in it, but it's pretty easy. The hardest part, of course, is getting that undisturbed animal to that age and the food. The logistics of putting the animal and the location together is way harder than figuring out how to kill him. You just sit in that redneck blind and peek out a half an hour before the end of legal shooting time, and there he is. But you have to get that ideal situation where he's on that property and he's undisturbed and the food source is still there that hasn't been ravaged during the summer. Those are the logistical parts that are more challenging. The hunting itself isn't that hard when you get those pieces together. Right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. Now, Bill, last year when you kind of got back on this new farm, I know you said that you basically have a lease, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it something in the neighborhood of 500 acres?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Now, that lease, is that part of something you had previously hunted years ago?
It borders it. There's been a lot of land changing hands in those 30+ years, and I kind of wish I'd stayed there because there were some really, really beautiful places that I hunted that changed hands, and the prices weren't super high at the time when the sales took place. So, in the back of my mind, I wish that if I was going to buy land, that I would have stayed home, so to speak. Yeah. So the lease borders one of the properties that I used to hunt, and it's in a really nice neighborhood. I mean, I was targeting that area in my attempt to buy something, because when we sold the farm in southern Iowa, I was going to replace it with something up in northeast Iowa near my parents so that I could spend more time around them during the hunting season. And, I just wasn't able to find anything that I wanted that was for sale. But that was one of the neighborhoods I'd zeroed in on, just from my prior experience of being in that area.
Right.
But it was way better now. Excuse me. It's way better now than it was back when I hunted it, in roughly 30-some years ago.
Yeah, I know you mentioned not just the quality but quantity of deer. Yeah, I mean, how much difference do you think that is from when you previously hunted there years back?
I bet you there's twice as many deer, if not more than that. So that does carry over into trophy quality as well. People think that, we need to keep the population down in order to grow big bucks. That's not really true, because what you have to have is you have to have enough bucks so that when everybody shoots one that wants one, there's still enough of them left over to get a year older. So at a certain point, you need numbers. Like, let's say in a certain neighborhood, they kill, 10 bucks a year. They're going to kill 10 bucks a year, whether there's 30 bucks in that neighborhood or 130. So if there's 130, well, then there's 120 of them at the end of the season that are getting a year older. So that's where numbers come in. Obviously, there's a balance. You can have too many deer, but the more you have up to that point, the more trophy bucks you're going to have, because there's just more bucks that make it a year older.
Right. Yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, for sure. And I would assume you probably remember some of those hunts where you now you kind of appreciate it, that there is more deer. I mean, it's just always fun to be on a hunt, even if you don't shoot something, just to see deer.
Oh, yeah. And I'm seeing, almost shooters practically daily.
Jeez.
Let's say a shooter is like a 3-year-old plus, from when I was a kid, right? So it's 140+ inch buck. I mean, you can see in decent areas of Iowa, you can see 140-inch deer almost every day. A 3-year-old buck. And, when I was a kid, that would be a season for me, to have an encounter with a 140-inch deer. So, yeah, it's way more enjoyable, way more, it's just fun to be out there and see those kind of deer moving through the woods and interacting with other deer and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's just it's better than sitting there and not seeing anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Every hunt you get to see deer, I always feel like it's successful and enjoyable, and you get something out of it for sure. When you got this farm, Bill, like, what was your first steps? Did you do a drive-through? Was there an easement that you could get, around his crops, or did you just boots on the ground, or did you do some sort of, like using an Onyx Huntstand, something in that manner to figure something out, and then, boots on the ground?
I think it's just, I've just hunted deer so long and in so many different places that I pretty much knew what I needed to do. I didn't have to start from scratch.
Sure.
I just had to figure out, because I knew what the deer were going to be, where they were going to be bedding, and where they were going to be feeding, and how they were going to be moving, and which trails they were going to be using. I could do all of that, looking at an aerial photo, basically. Yeah. The trick was just figuring out which parts of the farm had bucks that I wanted to shoot. So I ran, I think I had 8 or 10 cameras out, and it's just a big valley, so I ran half of them up one side of the valley, the other half up the other side of the valley. I never went up on the ridges at all, didn't touch the bedding areas, stayed completely away from places where I thought the deer were, spending their daytime. And then I just looked at those photos until I figured out which part of the farm had bucks that I was interested in, the more mature deer. And then I just zeroed in on those ridges, because that's where they bed. They live up on the ridges, and then they either go further out onto the ridges toward the ag fields where the ridges get wider, and that's where they go to feed, or they drop down into the valleys if there's food sources down in the valley, for the evenings. So it's pretty straightforward. Some people get all stressed out about hunting that really rough country, but I'd way rather hunt that because you know exactly what the pattern's going to be. Physically, it's more demanding, but from a strategy standpoint, it's pretty simple. So that's all I did is I just basically waited until I didn't want to start hunting too soon because I only have the one tag. I don't have a landowner's tag anymore.
Right. Okay.
So I didn't want to be done right away. So I kind of waited until the end of October before I got going, and just watched cameras and there wasn't. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but it's not as hard as people think. That kind of country. So I didn't do any scouting at all. I just, when the time came and I figured out where the bucks that I wanted to hunt were, I would just carry my stand in with me when I went in to hunt, and I'd put it up, and then I'd hunt, and then I'd leave it there, and then I'd come back to it if it was a good spot, or whatever. That's how I hunted it. There were no separate trips to put stands up.
Now, in that area, Bill, or at least on your farm, it looks like you kind of have a valley, and your valley is the food. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there's food on the ridges outside the valley
on top,
too.
on some of the other properties, right?
Yeah.
Correct, some crop
That's right.
fields. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yours is mostly a valley. So, in your opinion, are most of your deer bedding on that third to the top of those ridges?
Yeah, they're on the ridges for sure.
All the way up.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say necessarily all the way up. They bed that fringe. I'd say they're not going to be right on top. They like to be able to look out over the side, so they're going to be down over the ridge just enough where they can see down the slope.
Okay.
Yep, where they can see down the slope, and then they'll be generally on the downwind side of the ridge. So if it's an east-west ridge and the wind is out of the north, they're going to be bedded on the south side, looking down into the valley, and then the trails that they're going to cover or that they're going to use the most are going to be the ones about 30 yards down off the top, 20, 30, 40 yards down off the top that parallel the ridge on the downwind side. It's really, like I said, it's very simple hunting. That's where they go for the most part, even the does. So you just look at the wind and you look at the lay of the land and you think, okay, the challenge here is just how do I get in and out of there, without messing anything up. You don't really want to hunt the valley because the wind swirls too much down in those valleys, and especially if that's where the food is at, how do you get in and out without messing something up, especially if you're hunting by yourself and you don't have somebody to come and bump the deer off, to get you at the end of legal shooting time. So I just basically hunted the ridges, and that worked out really pretty well. And again, there's tricks to it, but, just hunting by myself, no cameraman, I could creep along real slow, and then once I got towards the top of the ridge, then I had these, I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're called the Limitrax. A guy named Scott Whitlock.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of like a
boot.
waiter boot.
Yeah, they're like a hip boot almost, except they're made out of nylon.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I'd carry those with me, and then because I don't want to climb the ridge, because they're pretty steep. I didn't want to climb it wearing those things because I would have, I'd still be halfway up the hill right now, 9 months later. Yeah, and just slippery and stuff. So I'd climb up, then I'd put them on, and I'd do that final approach to the tree. So that even the deer that were cruising back and forth along the ridge, they never picked up any scent. So the spot never really wore out. As long as they didn't catch you in the tree, they weren't smelling the approach that you made, coming and going. So that really helped. And having only one person in the tree versus two, I got away with a lot more. I had a group of does one time pin me. I'd just gotten in the tree. I didn't have my jacket on yet or anything. It might still have been at the base of the tree, and I was wearing just my thinnest, underlayer. And they came in on me and pegged me up there. And I didn't want to blow them out, so I sat perfectly still for 3 hours. I froze, but they never picked me up. They never really figured out what I was, and eventually they just drifted off. And if there would have been two of us, there's no way I could have got away with that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so I was able to keep that spot fresh. So, and again, you have to do those extreme things, whereas if you were filming, those are the things you just say, I'll blow them out, let's just move on.
Let's get that option.
Yeah.
For sure. So, like on those morning hunts, Bill, I know these deer pegged you, and maybe that wasn't a normal scenario, but how early are you getting in versus them coming off the crops and diving back into the bedroom? And do you notice a difference if they're coming from the bottom fields to feed from the top?
I don't think I've noticed that as much. Typically, it's going to be pretty well after daylight when most of the activity gets back into those places.
Sure.
So you're going to be, an hour after sunrise generally before it starts to, get interesting back in those bedding areas. So coming in the back door is the key. You have to come in from the opposite direction of the food. And as long as the wind aligns with that, which is, that's the chess match that you play, the wind has to be from the spot where the deer are feeding and, where you want to sit, blowing away from the food, away from your intended tree stand location. And then you come into that, with the wind in your face and come up on top. And that way, they're not going to know you're there. And typically if you set up, excuse me, like you're supposed to on that downwind fringe of those ridge tops, your scent is going to stay above the deer for a long ways on the downwind side as well. So
right.
It's kind of a killer setup. But the trick is you can't just go wading in there. You've got to play that coming in from the back door. And sometimes it doesn't set up. That's the beauty of, not having a schedule or an agenda like we talked about. I mean, I could have a morning where I just say, I'm going to go into town and, get a breakfast burrito at Casey's and a coffee.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not going to hunt because the chances of getting this, pulling this off is too low. So rather than even taking a risk on boogering this, I'm just going to not go, and I'll come back and try it again this evening or tomorrow morning or whatever. You can do that if you're not trying to produce a daily video blog. Nobody wants to watch you eating breakfast burritos for 15 minutes.
No, that's true. And like what you said was really key there is coming in from a way that you're not bumping or edging those crop fields, right? Those feed fields.
Yeah.
So
coming from the opposite direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Obviously you want to keep those deer on those fields. So, and then on top of that, like you said, you're doing those morning hunts, I assume, always on the top side of that ridge, and you have the luxury of that thermal, rising and keeping your scent out of there. And like you said, it almost seems to be like you got it figured out, and the way you just put it makes it seem like that's a pretty airtight spot.
Yeah, and typically what I've learned is it has to be almost dead still to get a thermal. So your day wind, I call them day wind, and that's what's on the weather forecast. Yeah, that's almost always going to be the prevailing element. I think thermals are an issue when you've got a couple thousand feet of elevation change, where you've got a lot of air density changes where you can really get some suction going. But in that country where you've only got a few hundred feet, 400 feet, 500 feet, whatever, right, it's not enough to overcome even like a 4 or 5 mile per hour day wind. So you always just play the forecasted wind, and you forget the thermals unless the forecast is light and variable, then your thermal is going to be what carries it.
Yeah. So, I mean, preferably you would always want that wind is kind of your best friend in that scenario.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you got to get up on top before it is your friend. If you're not on the top, it's your enemy because it's swirling all over the place.
Right. Yep. That makes sense. So, well, Bill, when we're talking about this property and this piece, like, let's kind of revisit last year and what happened last year when, you kind of went in to say, I want to figure out and locate a couple big bucks. So was it all based off of trail cameras? And when you did locate one, what was that kind of that initial first step? Was it to get another camera or figure out which part of that ridge I assume he's coming from?
Yeah, so I've got a kind of a method now. Excuse me, after I've got a cough. Hold on. After so many years now of doing this, I've kind of got a system in place that is sort of like, step 1, step 2, step 3. And step 1 is to just deploy the cameras in a lot of locations and kind of cast a wide net. And the whole goal of that is to, as quickly as possible, figure out where there's a buck that you'd be interested in shooting. So it's not necessarily to pattern that deer. I don't really use cameras to pattern deer as much as I do just to figure out which part of the farm that they're living in. People assume, well, there's a buck on the property, and if it's 500 acres, he's not going to be on the whole thing. And if it's 200 acres, maybe, but maybe not. So you still have to narrow it down to where does he spend most of his time. Ideally, you'd like to get daylight pictures at that point because that would tell you that, hey, this is a target that I can go after right away. But generally, you don't. Generally, you get the first part of September, you'll get daylight pictures, and then as you go through the month of September, they become less and less until you finally get, towards October, and then, you almost don't get any daylight pictures. And that's not hunting pressure. People think, this deer are conditioned. They're not. That's just their physiology. For some reason, that's what the bucks do.
Right.
Their testosterone level rises. They become more, reclusive, more individual. They're not. They just don't move as much during the day. And granted, there are situations where hunting pressure can make them nocturnal, but they become nocturnal even without hunting pressure. So anyway, if you find a couple of them maybe that are moving during the day, you could consider that, or even one, for October hunting. But generally, that's not the case in my experience. It's pretty dang rare. So usually you're just trying to find an area where there's a buck living that you say, yeah, granted, he's only coming through here at night or whatever, but I know where he lives. And then the other cameras tell you how big his range is. So you might get him on one camera or two cameras or three cameras or whatever. So you start to say, okay, I've got this part of the farm that he's probably living in. And in that kind of geography up there, like we talked about, it's pretty simple. He's bedding on one of these ridges. So you just have to say, okay, by process of elimination, I guess I could hunt all three of them, or I could, only focus on the one that, that's the easiest to hunt and hope that eventually he comes past there. So that's basically what I did was, I found one buck that I was more focused on than the rest. There were probably 4 or 5 that I would have shot, 3 or 4 maybe, and he was the biggest one. But he wasn't showing any daylight activity to speak of on the camera. He was coming from the same direction every evening. So that told me roughly where he was bedding, because there's only a couple of ridges in that direction. So I thought, well, he's bedding on one or the other of these 2 ridges. So I eventually got him kind of zeroed in. And then I didn't actually kill him on a morning hunt on one of those ridges. He still wasn't coming to the camera during the daylight up until the time that I started to get serious about hunting. So I was hunting him in the evenings as well on the ridge, thinking, well, he's still up there, when the sun sets. So there's no point in me hoping at some, by some leap of faith that he's going to show up down here in this valley in time for me to kill him.
Right.
I might as well go up there, and I can get away with it now. It's just me. Like I said, you can hunt a lot more hardcore, and you can hunt a lot better, right? So I was able to sneak in there, and I killed him on the ridge with an evening hunt. And he was just moseying along. I mean, it was an hour and a half before the end of legal shooting time, maybe 2 hours. I looked up, and I go, oh, crap, there he is. He was, that first initial adrenaline rush.
Right, yeah.
I think that's why we bow hunt.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one you feel like in your neck, like, it's your pulse, but on steroids.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, there he is. That moment is I think that's what I bow hunt for, other than just going to beautiful places, but
right.
That adrenaline rush, and then that, kind. Yep, it sets everything else in motion over the next, however long it takes until you get the shot. But I don't think I could have killed him with the cameraman in the tree with me, because I didn't see him until he was about 30 yards away, and he was walking straight toward me. Like I said, very leisurely, just kind of wandering along. Not, he wasn't on a mission. He was just, I don't know what he was doing, just out for a walk. I mean, it's kind of weird, but he was coming toward me, and if I would have said, hey, there's a big buck to the cameraman, and he would have had to lurch around from the backside of the tree and swing the camera around and get it over my shoulder and do all that other stuff, I feel like we would have been in big trouble. But he kept coming, and I very slowly stood up. He was probably 15 yards away, coming at me still before I got stood up. And then he kind of looked away down the slope, and I was able to draw my bow. And then he turned in that direction just a little bit. So he gave me a quartering toward shot, and with the equipment that I use, I mean, I can tuck it right into the shoulder, and I can kill him pretty good with those quartering toward shots. I don't recommend them to everybody in every situation, but you get up into that shoulder with the heavy stuff that I shoot, and I always get pass-throughs. Yeah. So I was able to kill him right there, 10 yards away. And like I said, I don't know that would have came off if there had been two of us in there.
Right. So when you stuck in that night, Bill, you had just kind of figured out, like, hey, based on the photos where he's coming out in the evening or later in the night, that he's on one of these two ridges. So did you happen to be, way above him on that? Was he working like one of those trails right off the top? And and were you?
He was working.
Sorry,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's
fine. I was saying he was working out toward the point. So he was coming from further back. I'd say further back on the ridge, away from the point. That in that country, the points are the ones that overhang the valleys. The ridges don't run parallel to the valley. They stick out into the valley because the ridges are actually made by the draws, on the sides running down into the valley. So he was coming from the wide part of the ridge towards the point, heading towards the fields on the bottom. So he would have I'm guessing he probably would have staged up on the end of that point somewhere, and then right around dark, he would have went down off the top, down into the valley. And towards where I had my camera, because I never had a camera up in any of that country. It's always down in the bottoms. But anyway, that's that. And also, to his credit, there was a young fellow that was hunting the farm next to mine that told me he'd seen him. We talked about the deer a little bit, and he said, yeah, I saw the buck yesterday or today, or I can't remember what it was, but it was very recently. So I figured which ridge he was probably on, just based on the neighbor telling me that he'd seen him. And I said, well, what do you think about this deer? He said, yeah, I think he's old enough, I think you should shoot him. And I'm like, okay. I wasn't going to, if he was hunting that deer and letting him go or whatever, I probably would have too, just to be, to be decent about it, not be a bull in a china shop, and storm in there and shoot somebody else's deer that they're trying to, grow. But he said, no, I'm trying to kill him. He said, if he comes by, go for it. So he did.
So when he came from that general direction, Bill, I don't know which way your tree stand was. Was it in front or back of you, or left or right, regardless? But was that a spot that you're like, he's definitely coming from there, or he's going to come from this way? Because when you saw him, you're like, oh, cripe, there he is. So was it surprising, or just surprising that, like, holy cow, it worked?
Holy cow, it worked. I think that was it more than anything, because on those ridges, they're not that long. The ridges are probably, 200-300 yards long at the most. So the deer generally will cruise along them back and forth sometimes, or, they're not, it's not one of those things where you set up in one spot and you're only going to see the deer that live in that spot. Generally, on those smaller ridges like that, you're going to see pretty much everything that's up there. So I wasn't anticipating him coming from one specific direction or another. I just figured, at some point, if he's here and he's cruising around, he's going to show up, somewhere. But the surprise was just the fact that it worked, that I actually saw him in daylight with that much time left.
Right.
And that close,
All right, guys, we're going to stop right here and make this part one. I'm going to upload episode 2 right away, but it's a long podcast, and just wanted to break it up, part 1 and part 2. So hopefully you guys enjoyed part 1. Check back. Tomorrow we'll have part 2 uploaded for you guys as well.